It's time to enhance the relationship between expertise and impact, between knowledge and application. Welcome to a journey of discovery and empowerment. Welcome to All Physicians Lead, the Forbes Books podcast that highlights the critical leadership role that all practicing physicians take on every day. Here's Dr. Leon Morse.
Welcome, everyone. I'm back with Renee DeSilva, CEO of the Health Management Academy. We've been discussing her extensive experience in healthcare leadership and the critical role physicians play as leaders in all aspects of their work, while challenging common misconceptions about leadership in healthcare. Renee, you've also done significant work on promoting diversity and leadership in healthcare. Can you share more about that vision? What can individuals and organizational leaders do to align themselves with making that vision a reality?
Yeah, so my take on this is diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a thing. It just needs to be a way that you do all things and sort of just needs to be weaved through all of the different elements of your org structure. So it's both in, do your leaders represent the broader organization from a demographics perspective? Does it represent the community in a way that makes sense, not just in the common measures of demographics, things like race and ethnicity and gender, but maybe things like different levels of ability, different levels of pedigree, other different ways that you think, conservative and liberal ideas coming together, like really having a lens on having an environment that has a broad representation within that. And then, I do believe that there's lots of articles on the business case of when you have greater diversity and representation, how that does improve outcomes. But I do think a lot of it just comes from having it like less be a single threaded initiative that's like that we are like checking boxes, and more about how are we building an environment that contemplates these things inclusively. And, an example that I would use for my own organization would be, I would think through, okay, we operated the DC metro area. That area has a, let's just say I'm a African-American woman. So I'll say, we've got 8% Black population in the DMV. Should the Health Management Academy roughly represent the demographics of the DMV? Probably. If we don't, if we look at bachelor's educated populations in certain parts of the market, we should probably map closely to that. If we don't, I'll just be asking, I wonder if there's anything about how we profile for talent or how we think about bringing in talent that just is a little bit of an outlier. Once we're there, I'd say, gosh, if our overall team member population has a certain percentage of people of color, do we have a gap in advancement, or do we see that same representation in leadership positions as we do in entry-level positions? If not, why? So I just bring a curiosity to it and try to do that in sort of all the different ways in which we think about the things that matter from a people and culture perspective at the firm. But largely for me, it's about the a way to do all things versus just having a initiative around it.
Yeah, how much of the discussion, the corporate culture, if you will, is really grounded? We talked earlier, and I go back to this quite frequently because I think it's incredibly important in any environment, to that idea of psychological safety, where people throughout the organization can say, hey, I noticed this, can we talk about it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that says easy and does hard, right? Especially when you put in things like perception of imbalance of power or positional authority in an organization. I think you have to work really hard to create those channels where if somebody notes something, they are comfortable raising it, especially if where they have to raise it would be a channel that they would feel like they would otherwise not have access to, or a person that they would otherwise not have access to. So I think that is a great aspiration. And I think it's one that we probably all fall a little short on in an honest moment. But I do think that's the thing. And also just assuming, I try to really assume positive intent. If something is said and maybe I feel like it was a little bit callous, I don't really assume that the person is. I can sometimes try to separate someone's intent versus the impact. Like their intent may not have been to offend me. The impact may have been that they did, but I can sort of try to separate those two threads. And so I think that's an evergreen terrain that we're all a muscle that we're all going to have to continue to work on developing.
Yeah, it's a natural human tendency. Evolutionary biology suggests that we respond more strenuously to threats than to benefits, and so it's kind of a very, very deep-seated evolutionary reflex to assume something is negative, and so to get to our super ego and say, I'm going to dial that reflex back. Takes, like you said, some thought, some effort, some practice. And then it goes back to, why do I need to put that effort in? And you put that effort in because you're a leader, you have impact, and your reactions, even if it's just a facial expression, have impact. I was at a table one time where I was the CEO and one of my senior staff members, when another member of the team made a comment about a proposal that was on the table, and that senior staff member just looked over and said, "Stay in your lane." And believe me, there was some, immediate response, and then some subsequent counseling that, if anybody ever used that phrase again on our team, there'd be some repercussions, because that certainly doesn't.
It does not. And
input.
this is really important, because I think what you also then want in that situation is for the other colleagues to say, like, you want to create an environment where somebody would be comfortable saying on behalf of that person, like, that was like, actually, no, I'd really love to hear your perspective.
Right. And that was the initial response in front of the group was, no, what was that comment? That was, really useful. And you saw the person who made the comment kind of sit back like, oh
yeah, I may have not handled that well. Yeah. And then, I'm always a big fan of giving praise in public and giving constructive feedback in private. Right. So I never want to, always want to be sensitive to that. And also just try to tap into like what was going on with certain people when they do things that just seem a little bit out of character. Like, gosh, like, were they operating under stress and pressure that day? Was somebody moving their cheese? Like, not that it's an excuse, but I'm just curious. I would just say, stay curious is like the mantra that we have internally. When something is, like, you're like, oh, I don't understand that. Like, I just ask.
What was that?
Yeah. I just want to ask more. I just want to stay curious and figure it out, ask more questions.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's healthier too, right? I mean, it makes you feel better, because then you're not like raging inside. You're just like, I remember I sort of grew up professionally as a neurosurgery resident, and then a chief of neurosurgery, and then I became the chairman of surgery. And, as a neurosurgeon, it's, you against the world. I mean, everybody's trying to, get in your stuff, but then you get to, the big boy and girl table where you're a department chair, and you've got the hospital CEO and the chief nurse and the chief administrator and the logistician, and everybody's there. And, sometimes you initially think, wow, what are these people saying? How did they conclude that? And then if you sort of dial it back a little bit, like you said, be curious. It's like, okay, how would a dedicated, smart, hardworking nurse administrator come to a conclusion that's so radically different than what I thought we should do? And then ask them, like you said, just kind of say, wow, I didn't dissect it that way. Really teach me how you got there, and it engenders that trusting relationship that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, I love that.
So when we talk about what you're doing, you also have eyesight on many, many healthcare leaders and systems throughout the country. Are there other places that are diving deep into this physician and other team members throughout their organization to develop the leadership traits that we've been talking about here? And what are some of the highlights, or some organizations that are really good at this?
I mean, I think a lot of, so we work, in particular, I spend a lot of time with large leading health systems. So those would be in this bucket of about $2 billion in operating revenue or greater. And I think many of them have invested in sort of building a lot of their own programs around this, whether it's, sort of university settings, or really investing behind a chief learning officer whose job it is to sort of target and build programs that are fit for purpose for, various individuals. And I think the ones that I've seen that have been notable are able to take like the practicum and maybe the curriculum and embed that in the contextualized context of the culture of that organization. I think of like one organization that comes to mind where their CEO is a very large health system. Their CEO attends every new hire onboarding session and spends 2.5 hours like anchoring in what does it mean to be a leader here. And again, like the leader is defined broadly, like just being part of this environment. I think is another example. I think a third might be, I remember talking to a chief nurse not too long ago, and they've really made some efforts in when they are creating some of their programming to develop the more administrative skill set for nurse leaders. Like they're looking in not obvious places, right? Like it may be a charge nurse that didn't raise her hand for something, but somebody sees something in them and they're sort of pulling them through. So I think when I see internal programs, they're customizing it for their cultural environment. There's commitment at the CEO level to invest and to show up. And then there's identifying talent in not obvious places and helping them see potential in themselves that maybe they would have otherwise missed.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of the folks that you deal with are making this transition from mostly clinical time and looking to the future of becoming more of a physician executive, if you will. What do you tell folks about that transition? What are the pitfalls? How do they learn, in addition to, of course, attending your programs and fellowship?
Well, maybe if I can take a little liberty, I'm going to tell you what we hear from them after maybe immersing in the program, because I think that's probably more interesting than what I would tell them. I think what they tell us is what they get out of it is really understanding how do they think about culturing innovation and excellence in all aspects of their work. They will admit to really not understanding how healthcare works. And neither do, I don't think many people do, because if you had a blank sheet, you wouldn't recreate it the way that it does today.
Yeah, well, that's understandable, because apparently Diamond, Bezos, and Buffett couldn't figure out healthcare either, because it's just way too complicated. So they're in good company.
Exactly. But starting to understand a little bit around the systemness component of it, I think is a big piece of it. I think they tell us that they, come out of it with a broader vocabulary or nomenclature that allows them to be stronger advocates for patients and other providers. I think they get a sense for that there is a ton of complexity and no easy answer. So maybe a little bit more acknowledgement of the leaders who may believe to be leaders and some of the unpopular decisions that have been maybe thrust upon them. They have a little bit more situational awareness and context for the why. So they can be much more constructive in future problem solving. I think those are a few of the things that they echo back to us around as they're sort of making that transition from, managing oneself to managing others, how the investment in time maybe opens the aperture in a way that sort of starts to really help them continue to make that transition. And, I would say, Leon, the one other thing would be we try really hard not to tell them anything. Like our model is we provide we're provocative on the props, and then we have a lot of discussion, and they need to tell each other, right? Or we might have a former chief medical officer talk through his or her experience and what they got wrong in a moment of vulnerability. And then, the fellows need to learn from that. So I do think there's something about the way that you get leaders, particularly adult learners, to change behavior is you really, you worked with more physicians than I have. I don't think you can tell them anything. They have to tell themselves, right?
Yeah. So true. It's like the old question, do you know how many psychiatrists it takes to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to really want to be changed. So, that's
exactly
similar to getting doctors to not just show them the water, but get them to drink.
Exactly.
So every healthcare organization is, limited in resources. What do you tell folks who are sending their docs to your program, who are building leadership development programs about the return on investment, both measurable and intangible, to doing something like this? Do you actively encourage people to build these programs, show them who the great organizations are that are doing it? What's the hook?
Yeah, I mean, on that one, I would say it's interesting. Like what we notice, I mentioned, there's about 150 people that are in our membership orbit. But when I look at like where the majority of our classes, our new classes of fellows or physician leadership development participants come from, it's like 25 to 30. So what I would say is like there is a group of organizations that get it and invest in it, and a group of organizations that maybe have less prioritization around it. And so one of the questions that we're asking ourselves right now is how might you frame out for people, sort of the journey of a fellow or the journey of a physician leader and what's been their role and impact if you look across the like 5-year trajectory of their role. Because I think what we note is that there's a group of organizations that believe in development and there are a group of organizations that don't. And we haven't really tried a lot of levers to convince the folks that don't. I would say, going back to the ones that do, I think it comes down to like, I think objectively they're looking at things like, does my succession plan feel like it's been de-risked because I have a sense for who my near next could be as I have leaders moving out across the organization? I think they would look to engagement scores. Like, am I moving the needle on my engagement scores? Because we know, back to your earlier point, that the major driver of engagement oftentimes is the team and the manager for whom you work. And so do I see my engagement moving in the right direction? I think they look at impact. Like when I go to our graduations, we have a lot of pomp and circumstance around our graduations. When I hear the stories that are told there, it's more around these people coming in to solve an intractable issue and just how much progress they're able to accomplish in such little time. I don't know what metric that moves, but like, we have more people solving hard problems. So that's what I'd note in the universe of people who invest in it. We haven't tried, and probably should make more of an argument for people who are maybe less inclined to invest in it. Like, what's the ROI of developing your talent? We've maybe spent less time on that than we ought to, because we've had like a very robust group of 25 to maybe 40 at the upper end of health systems who are all in.
Yeah. That's the old apocryphal story about the CEO saying, we're going to train all these folks in leadership and we're going to invest in their professional growth. And the CFO says, well, what if we train them and they leave and that we've wasted all this money? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't and they stay? Right. Classic statement. It's interesting. You were saying that, and this light bulb went off in this is a study, right? See if there's a statistically significant difference in some key metrics that we think leadership development impacts. So take those, 25 organizations that are all in, look at their, physician and employee retention statistics, look at their team member engagement stats, and contrast those and see if there's a discrepancy between, 50, randomly picked other organizations that have never sent anybody. You've got a research incubator here to say, there's, higher turnover, there's less engagement. And that speaks to the concept that leadership from the top, that this is probably not the only place that those big organizations are developing their teams, right? They're probably doing other things. But you've sort of got a self-selected dichotomy here that, someone could do a regression analysis on and go, there is a statistically significant difference between those who are investing in their people and those who demonstrably are less so. Yeah,
I think that's an interesting idea. It's almost like a learning lab that could really put a spotlight on that. And then I also think through, we've got probably 1,500 alumni floating in the orbit here across different healthcare organizations. It'd also be good to also go micro and just understand like their stories and their pathways. And I can think of Dr. Janice Nevin, who's the CEO of Christiana Care. She wouldn't mind me telling the story. Who was in our first class of physician fellows probably 16 years ago, and now was leading a very large health system. And she'd say, among other things, the leadership moments and opportunities that have sort of unfolded as part of her academy experience were really helpful in navigating all the bumps and all the transitions and all the things that you don't know as you step into bigger and bigger roles, right? From managing departments and divisions to a CMO role to a CEO role. So like, I do believe that the trajectory has just been really interesting to see, but could probably do a better job storytelling around that.
Yeah, no, that's great, and get that word out to potential future applicants. Big topic as well, well-being, resilience, burnout, things like that. Any thoughts on how both leadership training in general, but a lot of what we've talked about is knowing yourself, knowing what your tendencies are. How do you respond in stressful and non-stressful environments? To me, it's just inherently obvious that that's going to help you deal with some of these challenges that we all have practicing medicine, between, the EMR and productivity goals and stress of just taking care of sick people and being responsible for their health. How does some of the training that you do or that you see other organizations do impact that important metric?
I love this question. I would say a few things on resilience. The one thing that we try to push on is resilience is not just about how me as an individual studies myself or manages my stress. It's also about what changes in the environment need to be driven so that the environment itself is not a boiling pot of water. We really try to manage this on both ends. It's like, certainly there are things that you can do in your own head and in your own four walls, but it's what can happen environmentally. And the things that I have been noting so part of maybe more broadly than just our leadership program, when I hear from systems who've really tried to tackle this, specifically physician burnout, I think it's been some promising work using technology to reduce some of the burdens, like whether that's a ambient listening technology that helps to automate note taking so that folks can get more time back in the evening, like that probably begins to return joy to work. Whether that is destigmatizing the need for mental health care and support through having that available to clinical leaders in a way that is easy to access, whether that's like having moments when trauma happens to sort of process that trauma in psychologically safe ways, like right after a code. I've just been really impressed with the investment and commitment to not just expecting the individuals to be more resilient, but to create the environment where perhaps you don't have to be so armored to survive in. And I think there's been a lot of good movement on that front across healthcare. More to go, but some good early moves.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance. From the very beginning in the training, you recognize that you have people's health and sometimes often lives, in your hand, and mistakes have impact, and being able to recognize those mistakes, move on from them, know that, we're fallible humans. Taking care of fallible humans is another one of those things, as you mentioned before, that sounds very logical, but in practical application, becomes very difficult. Do any of your physician leaders that you talk about any tools and techniques specifically where either they individually or with their teams have worked through how to be vulnerable and how to talk about these and how to say, I wanted to quit after we lost that patient last week?
Yeah. I mean, I'm aware of, and you may be too, of like so many organizations standing up like Office of Physician Wellbeing, where they are running, programs that are available real time to process through these things. And I'm probably less clear on all the different specific tools, but I've definitely seen in the last, probably like through COVID and coming out of COVID, an increased emphasis on how do we support those efforts and like what moves the needle on that, whether it's providing Lyra mental health platform across all of your team members that for your team members and their family, so that you can sort of process through the trauma that maybe you've been exposed to, whether it's like having colleagues who are trained in mental health 911, right? Like there's a whole body of work around how you can train the trainer on how to meet people in crisis moments. And so I do think the conversation has expanded around these things that would have been maybe hushed and stigmatized in the past, and trying to move through in a way that feels far more productive and human centered than maybe was the case 10 years ago. But I don't know. Would you agree with that
Yeah,
statement?
no, I totally agree. I think that culture is changing, and actually not glacially slowly. And living through COVID and seeing the environment where people were coming in to do something that nobody signed up for, right? I spent 33 years in the Army, and you go into a dangerous environment, you signed up for that, firefighters, police. So that my life is at risk was part of what you signed on for. Not since, plagues of the past have physicians gone to work, nurses gone to work, administrators, technicians gone to work saying, this could kill me.
Yeah, that's right.
And something that, even in the military, you're not dealing with. And I could take this home and it could kill my family members. So there was a whole nother level that not only did folks not overtly sign up for, I mean, we knew tuberculosis was out there, and, there were some other infectious diseases that could be potentially transmitted to you, but this was big and nobody knew. And yet to see folks day in and day out coming in, it really was a forcing function for all of us to wrap our arms around each other and say, hey, are you okay? And I think that was a huge shift in this intra-system empathy that is persistent. You really still see it. You're paying attention and looking and seeing if someone's having a tough day. And I think that was, if you could look for a silver lining of the stress that we were all under, I think that would be it.
Yeah, I agree. And then I just staying on this thread one more moment, sort of beyond that element, I think there's just work to be done on how to make the work less friction. How do you sort of take out some of the friction? And I've been hearing pretty good stories from a lot of our leaders around how technology is significantly moving the needle on that. Or at least taking out some tasks that give a little bit more time and white space to tackle the more challenging pieces. So, my hope is if we were having this conversation 10 years from now, like the concept of physician documentation burden is like not something that we're even talking about anymore, because there's just ways to make that far less onerous. Or, managing denials, or like all the things that take up the space around the purpose of the work, which is to treat and heal people and meet people when they're in their most vulnerable moments. I hope that we'll continue to see more progress there, which I think then addresses burnout, because you return joy to work.
Yeah. And, the additional positive impact of something like that is then when I'm in the office with a patient, I am sitting facing them and giving them my full attention, not turned to a keyboard, inputting data simultaneously with the patient going, I can't even see Moore's face, so a big change, hopefully that will continue. On that topic, you can't not cover, IT, AI, systems getting hacked and losing, the nightmares that senior leaders have every night. How do folks looking at going into senior leader positions sort of steel themselves and say, rather than, okay, there's no way I want that job, to encourage physicians at that mid-career point that you teach and coach so well, to say, we've all had our problems, and somehow you'll deal with it, or what's the message to them that it'll be okay?
I mean, I think the message, first of all, there is a generational shift happening across healthcare. We're sort of seeing that, like the rooms are changing, and you have the ability to respond to things or to shape things. And, most people are, a lot of folks are up for I want to be in a position to shape versus have to respond. And I think when you have that view, right, where you have some agency as to where things go, well, yes, it's stressful and there are hurdles that need to be overcome. I think a lot of these folks have a real energy and commitment and passion for the work and can be in a position to shape the direction of healthcare. And I think that's like a really exciting thread. That would be my answer. Come shape versus respond to, complain about, be frustrated by the future of healthcare.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us who made that leap into the semi-frozen lake with not really knowing how to swim, did it for that same reason, that, we're just passionate about better care for patients and, potentially saw some ways to do that.
Exactly. And I also think, you should do hard things, like the things that make your palms sweaty and you're nervous and you feel like you're not ready and you're ill-equipped, like go do that. That's the other message I often have, like go try those things. Like growth is always on the other side of your learning curve. And note when you're coasting and when you have more capacity to contribute and go try it. That's the other piece.
Nice. That actually almost answers my final question that I like to leave with is one or two key pieces of advice for physicians, physician leaders, through your lens with all the experience you've had. Anything you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, maybe it's just that future favors the bold, and we need more bold leaders in all aspects of healthcare.
Nice. Well, we'll seek them out and help you find them as well. So I really, really appreciate that. Listen, thank you very much for your time. And we know the listeners will get a lot out of your insights and experience. And thanks again for what you do here in America.
Always good to see you.
Likewise. Take care.
Thanks.
And that'll do it, everyone, for another episode of All Physicians Lead. If you like the show, please take a moment to subscribe so we can notify you when new episodes drop. In addition, please take a moment to leave us a review so others can benefit from the leadership insights of our terrific guests. See you next time as we continue redefining physician leadership.
This has been All Physicians Lead. We can all be better leaders, and our teammates and patients will be the beneficiaries. Go to allphysicianslead.com to unlock your potential, sharpen your impact, and elevate your journey. All Physicians Lead with Dr. Leon Morse is a production of Forbes Books.